guys doing today? Good to see you. All right. We're going to talk about relationships. We're going to talk about forgiveness. We're going to talk about how when we don't forgive people or we haven't been forgiven, we have a big bag of garbage that we carry around with us. That's what we're going to talk about today. You guys notice probably my big bag of garbage, right? Probably hard to miss. But this is what I carry around when I don't forgive people. When I don't go and I don't clear up their relationships with people. When we do that, when we go through life and we don't have forgiveness for somebody else, we carry a big bag of garbage around with us wherever we go. Just imagine that when you're waking up and you just have this big bag of garbage just laying on your chest. You know, as you roll it over, it's kind of just going wherever you go. And you get up, you drag it to the shower, and you make your breakfast and your lunch, and you get in the car, you go to the GO station, you get on the train, take the train into Toronto. You just carry this bag of trash. I don't know about you guys. Bags of trash are smelly, they're gross, they're stinky. And in my house, we don't take it out, and they start to fester, they start to get bad, right? You know what I'm talking about when I talk about trash? Right? That's what unforgiveness is. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about what it means to have relationships, but also what is forgiveness? How do we have that? Why do we need to do it? What is the purpose? What is behind it? And to really understand forgiveness, we have to step back. We have to step back into a place where we look at, okay, what are we really trying to forgive? Or what are we trying to be forgiven for? And when it comes right down to it is, we're talking about sin. We're talking about things that we do that are offensive. Things that we do to offend people. All right? Have you guys ever been there where you've been offended or you've offended somebody and you just don't know what to do, but you can feel that tension between you? Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend or a coworker, maybe it's somebody in church. Right? But we have these times when we have this thing between us. We've been offended or they've been offended, and we have this thing that we need to do, and sometimes it's not easy to do, right? Sometimes it's not easy to ask for forgiveness, and sometimes it's really not easy to forgive somebody, especially when we're looking at what the offense might be. This is what we need to look at today. This is the crux of it. What we need to understand is what is forgiveness. So what I did was I go to the dictionary. Whenever I don't know what something means, I go to the dictionary. I want to know exactly what this means. I'll make sure that it's not something that I've just been telling myself over the years. And this is what the dictionary says about forgiveness. It says, to cease to feel resentment against an offender means to pardon them, to make it right. And then it says this, to grant relief from payment of a debt. We grant a relief from that. How many of you guys have ever had a debt, a money debt with someone, and they just said, you know what, it's okay, you don't owe me anything. Anybody ever have one of those? Usually it's with parents. If you've been a kid and you borrowed money from a parent, and then they say, you know what, I know that you owe me this money, but you know, I'm just going to forgive that debt. My father had done that to me for many times when I was younger. And what a great feeling it is, right? What a great feeling it is when you have all this debt and then suddenly it's forgiven. And when you get right down to it, this is what Jesus has done for us. I just want to make that perfectly clear. See, in the beginning, when they were in the garden and they sinned against God, Adam and Eve, they sinned against God. They offended Him. They did something egregious. And what it did was it split that relationship up. This relationship that we had with God the Father, it split it up. They were separated because of that sin. And now every generation that comes after them has had this sin in their life, this sin that comes with them in birth, and also the sin that they have committed, which continually separates us from God. But God, in all His glory and all His wisdom and all His power and all His love for us, what He did was He sent His Son to come to this earth, to live an honest and true and godly life, and then to die for our sins. In essence, He came to get rid of the resentment, to get rid of that offense that we have committed, and then He came to pay the debt. And that's what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about how do we do this for ourselves, with God, but also how do we do this with other people. And what I want you to do is, if you've got your notes there, you can write these things down. It helps me sometimes when I do it. I want you guys to know this. Forgiveness cannot be earned. Forgiveness cannot be earned. How many of you guys have ever had somebody where you knew you had to forgive them, and they were trying to get you to forgive them. They were doing everything in their power. Maybe it was vice versa. You needed forgiveness, and you were doing everything. You were trying to be the best person. You were trying to take care of them. Just forgive me. You just want them to forgive you. But you know what? You can't earn forgiveness. Forgiveness is not something that we can work for. This is what we see in our relationship with God. We cannot do enough to get back with God. We can't restore that relationship on our own. We can't be good enough. We can't make enough money. We can't love enough. We can't help each other enough. We can't do anything enough. It's got to be something that God gives us. And so we see in Romans 3:23 it says, all have sinned and are not good enough to share God's divine greatness. We are not good enough to share in God's divine greatness. We cannot earn the forgiveness from God. We can't do the things. Romans 6:23 says, when people sin, they earn what sin pays, and it's death. But God gives his people a free gift, eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. He says, you know what? I'm going to pay that debt for you. Just like the parents do for their kids. I'm going to pay that debt for you through my son Jesus. And this is what he does. He comes in and he says, you know what? It can't be earned, so I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to make this right. And he has made that right. And so now we have to start emulating God. We have to be like God. We can't just carry around our garbage all day long. When we have a problem with people, we can't just be like, you know what? I don't care. I'm just going to carry this around. Because you know what happens when we carry garbage around? Bitterness happens. Unresolved issues. You write this down. Unresolved issues lead to bitterness. How many of you guys ever felt bitterness towards somebody? You don't have to raise your hand. But I know I have. I know I felt bitterness to somebody. And it's because I'm carrying around this garbage. It's festering and it's starting to smell and it's starting to leak and it's getting everywhere. People on the GO train don't like me because I'm carrying it all around here. And what happens is we start dealing with people and even maybe this relationship is the one that's really affected, but it starts affecting all our other relationships. Do you know what I mean? Isn't that what garbage does in our house? All right, if it's just me, it's not a big deal, but when other people start coming in and start stinking, it starts affecting other people. Unresolved issues lead to bitterness. Proverbs 14:10 says this, the heart knows its own bitterness, and no stranger shares its joy. When we have bitterness in our heart because of unresolved issues, when we haven't asked for forgiveness or forgiven people, nobody around us is going to bring us joy. That's what that passage is saying. No stranger is going to come in and just be rejoicing with you because you have this bitterness. Hebrews 12:14-15 says this, strive for peace with everyone, and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. So the writer of Hebrews here is saying, hey, be careful of this. This is a problem. If you don't make peace, if you don't get to forgiveness, if you don't try to figure out what is going on between this relationship, there's going to be a root of bitterness that's going to start to grow. A root of bitterness. You know, and I don't know about you guys, if you've ever tried to pull out a big root out of the ground, it's hard. I remember Gina and we moved into this house, and we had all these trees, and it was a really small space, but there's one tree they planted, I think it was 5 fig trees in one spot. And then they put one of those tomato cages around it, you know what I mean? When they were small. And then this thing grew up, and it got to be about this big around. And I was like, I gotta pull this thing out. It's crazy. So I started digging, and I'm getting in there, and there are roots everywhere. Anybody ever tried to pull out a root, a big tree root? It's incredible. And it was going everywhere. And I had sawzall out, and I was cutting it, and I was chopping, and I finally hooked up a chain to it, and I hooked it up to my minivan, and I pulled that sucker right out of the ground, right? But it took me about 4 weeks of just part-time digging and cutting and chopping and pulling, because that root was so big, it just didn't want to leave. That's what we're talking about with bitterness. Bitterness that sets in, and it just doesn't want to leave. The only way to chop that out, the only way to get rid of that is to forgive. The only way is to forgive people. But how do we do that? What does that look like? How do we actually do it? There's a couple of different ways we're going to look at it. I want to show you this movie. Me and Jim, we watched watched this movie this weekend, and it's called Unbroken. If you've seen it, it's a little bit violent, very violent. Not a little bit, very exaggerated way to say that. But it's about this guy who just calamity after calamity after calamity happens to him during World War II. And you're going to see just the trailer, just to give you an idea of what his life looks like. So let's just watch that together.
However dark the night, however dim our hopes.
Inbound 4 o'clock low.
The light will always follow darkness.
Keep going the way you're going, you end up as a bum on the street. You train. You fight harder than those other guys, and you win. You can take it, you can make it. You can do this, Lou. You just gotta believe you can. Pop does. Ma does. I do.
Louis, a moment of pain is worth a lifetime of glory.
We're gonna die out here.
We're not dying!
I got good news and bad news.
Who is the Olympic athlete? Don't look at me. Hello, mother, father. This is your Louis talking. I am now interned in a Tokyo prisoner of war camp. I can't say this. What it says about America, it's not true. This man must be taught respect. Each prisoner will teach him this lesson. I used to think that I could do anything, that I was better than I am.
Who says you're not?
If you get me through this, I swear I'll dedicate my whole life to you. If I can take it, I can make it.
Stay down.
If he drops it, shoot him. Come on.
Movie, and it's true. When you watch the movie, you go, man, this guy was unbroken. This guy his name was Louis, and he was born in New York, but he moved to California when he was 5. And his whole family spoke Italian. And so all the kids in California, they would tease him, and they would push him down, and he would get in fights. And pretty soon what he found is that he just didn't like people, and so he was just wanted to go and be alone. And he started drinking at the age of 8. But his brother and his father brought him back, and they gave him something. They gave him the gift of athletics. And he was a very good runner, and he could beat people. And he rose to a place where he was the best in California, and he went to the Olympics in Berlin in 1936. And he didn't win, but he had a plan and a purpose for himself, and it was looking like it was pretty good. And then World War II happened, and he was a bombardier on one of those bombing planes. And when they were out looking for another plane that had gone missing, they crash landed into the ocean. He spent 47 days in this life raft. 11 men went in with the plane, and only 3 men came out. And after that 47 days, one of the men had died, so it was just him and another guy. And they survived this ordeal, and he says, I don't know if you heard it in there, he said, while he was in the raft, Lord, if you are real, if you get me out of this, I will serve you for the rest of my life. And so they were finally rescued, but they were rescued from the enemy. The Japanese found him first. And he was put into a small cell for another 48 days. And he was tortured and beaten and asked things. And then they moved him into 2 different POW camps. And so for 1 year and 1 day, this man was completely lost to the world. They thought he was dead, but he wasn't. He was being tortured. He was being offended. He was being beaten and ridiculed. And this man that hits him right there, they called him the Bird. And he was one of the top 40 war criminals of World War II. And this guy had every reason to hate them. He had every reason to hate God. He had every reason, from our standpoint, to not be forgiven, not to not have forgiveness in his heart. What ends up happening to Louis is he gets out of the military after the war is over, and he gets married, and I bet you he thought, well, my life should get better by now. But he kept having nightmares, and he started drinking to alleviate that. And pretty soon he was just a sloppy drunk who was a war hero. And his wife was getting ready to divorce him. I watched this video of him. He was in his 80s. He was giving an interview. And he said that he would have these nightmares where he was choking his daughters. And he woke up one night and was literally choking his wife. And so she had enough. But the beautiful part of this story is this. She went to a big, huge, what they called a crusade back then, with Billy Graham. And she met Jesus and she got saved. And she came back and she said, Louis, you need Jesus. And she got all her friends, all her Christian friends together, and they said, Louis, you need to know who Jesus is. And as he started talking and listening and hearing about Jesus and God, he started remembering that promise he made to God when he was in that life raft in that 47 days. And he said, I really haven't done any of that. And so he went and he met with Billy Graham and he saw the crusade and he heard the message and he became saved. And he says in this one interview, he says, you know, when I started realizing what God has done for me, I started forgiving those people that had done those things to me. And he said, once I forgave those people, the nightmares stopped. I never had it. See, for him, Louis, and we could all sit here and go, you know what, rightly so, and it's gotten to a lot. But for him, that root of bitterness was so strong in his life that he wasn't going to give it up. And it went so far back, it went before World War II. It went back to those kids beating them up on the street. It went back to just being in a bad place, being broken, and being separated from Jesus, being separated from God. And once he realized that, and he came back to Jesus, he gave his life to Jesus, things changed around for him. He had a pretty good life, actually. You know, I'm sure he still struggled with many things. I'm sure it wasn't all cakes and roses, but it got better. And so I think that Louis was broken. I think he was really broken. I know the movie's called Unbroken. I really think he was broken until he gave his life to Christ. And then God restored him. Isn't that a cool story? I think this movie should be called Forgiven. I think that's really what I'd love for him to make another side of this movie where we get to see the rest of his life, because he goes off and he starts preaching, he starts teaching, he becomes a speaker that just goes out and talks about his story and how people need to know Jesus. So this is a story of redemption. But this is what I think Louis learned. And I want you to write it down. This is my third point. We forgive others because God has forgiven us. See, we need to forgive other people because God has forgiven us. What's so cool about this story with Louis is not just that he forgave them in his heart. He literally went back to Japan and he met with some of the guards, the ones that would meet him. And he said to them face to face, I forgive you for what you did to me. How powerful is that? To literally stand in front of somebody who has offended you so greatly and say, I forgive you. I know that I need to forgive you. And then to be able to say, I forgive you because God has forgiven me. You see, I think Louis realized that he, too, was broken, that he needed forgiveness, that he needed that debt repaid. In 1 John 1:9 it says this, but if we confess our sins, God will forgive us. We can trust God to do this. He always does what is right. He will make us clean from all the wrong things that we have done. See, Louis is like us. We need to understand that we cannot do anything to be forgiven. We can't be good enough. We can't earn it. And that if we're not careful, these offenses that we have towards other people will soon grow into bitterness, and we'll carry that around like a big bag of garbage. And then we got to come to this place where we realize God has forgiven me, and so therefore I need to forgive others. So how does that happen? How do we do that? How do we make that happen? Well, it's my last point. Is this. Forgiving others happens in the heart. It has to happen in the heart. This is the heart. When the Bible talks about the heart, It's not talking about our literal beating heart. It's talking about the place where we make all our decisions, right? It's an emotional, but it's also a logical place. It's like this is everything. When you make a decision, it goes through your heart first. And so what we need to do is we need to forgive in our hearts. It's got to be that deep. It can't just be a, I'm sorry, or, oh, I forgive you. It can't be that flippant. It's got to be something that we go down and we really investigate it. It's got to really turn our lives around. Paul, or the writer of Acts writes this, 26:20, he says, I began telling people to change their hearts and lives and turn back to God. And I told them to do what would show that they had really changed. He's saying, I'm telling these people that now know God, well now your heart needs to change. When your heart changes, then your life needs to change. And people will start seeing that, the way you live your life. They will know that your heart has changed. This is really true for any of us that have kids, right? You know if your kid really means what they say if their lives change. That's the whole idea, is we need to change with our heart. I have a friend who had everybody has a grandmother, but she had a grandmother, and her grandmother was mean. It was just a very, very mean woman. And so mean that later in life, she literally sued her own daughter. She sued her for a ridiculous reason. And it caused a problem throughout the family, brother against sister and mother and against kids, and it was just horrible the way this all transpired. And she held this in. She was very, very angry with this grandmother person. And she held it in and separated herself from everything that the grandmother would do. And then about 2 years later, the grandmother died. And I remember talking with her, and she was telling me how she was driving in a car. And she was thinking about her grandmother and all the bad things that her grandmother had done. And she started feeling like, oh my gosh, this is just too overwhelming for me. And she started to cry, and she started to cry out to God. And she said, God, I know that I need to forgive her, and I don't know how. And in that prayer and in that time, she cried, and she really poured her soul out to Jesus. And she forgave her grandmother. And it was one of those moments where she said, I don't have to worry about this anymore. I don't have to deal with this. This is not who I am anymore. What she did was she took out the trash. She took that big garbage bag that was this bitterness and this unforgiven heart, and she said, I'm going to throw this away. I'm going to give it to Jesus. I'm going to let him deal with this kind of stuff. And she did. It's been a really good ride for her since then. Right? The hurt doesn't go away. It will over time. But the offenses, they don't go away. They really did happen. But she was able to forgive her grandmother. And that's where we need to be. We need to be right here. Psalms 51:10 says this. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. We need to create a new heart. We need to get clean, right? Take the garbage out is what that verse is saying. Get rid of it. It's no good for anybody. Get rid of it. Create in me a clean heart, God. Get rid of the garbage. Renew my spirit. I don't want to have to worry about my enemies anymore. I don't want to have to worry about those people who offended me. So what do? You do this, right? You forgive others. It happens in the heart. Some of you may have to go directly to somebody and say, you've offended me, and I want you to know that I forgive you. That might be something that you need to do. Sometimes it's not the best way to go about it. Sometimes maybe that's a person who's very violent or the situation is too big. But the fact is you have to get to a place where you can forgive them in your heart. Sometimes maybe it's a person like my friend who's the person has died. And there's no way you can physically go to them. But you gotta find that in your heart. And you gotta forgive. Just the way God has forgiven us. My suggestion is if it's not a place where you could be hurt or anything like that, go to the person directly. Let them know graciously, with love, what they've done. Sometimes people don't even know that this offense has happened. And then you say, I just want you to know that I forgive you. It's a very powerful word. It's a very powerful tool to see God move in your life. It's one of our heart attitudes, actually, is to clear up relationships. And that's what we want to do, is we want to clear up these relationships so that we can get rid of this garbage and we can move forward. So there's a couple of things I want you to do this week. Number one, I want you to memorize Psalms 51:10. Just memorize it. It's not very hard. Create me a clean heart, oh God, and renew a right spirit within me. And when you guys are in a place where you're having some bitterness rise up, or you're thinking about somebody in a different way, you're just like, oh, they make me so angry. Just say this verse over and over. Create me a clean heart, oh God. Renew a right spirit within me. It will help. I promise you, it will help as you work through this. It's almost like a prayer. You can just pray it to God and say, God, this is what I want. It might take time, but you can get it done. Sometimes, it's like a house of order, right? Sometimes there's just so much garbage in there, it's going to take a while to get it out. But you keep pushing forward. So memorize that verse. Secondly, I'd like you to make a list. You don't have to share with anybody, just for yourself. Make a list of people that have offended you, that you have a problem with. Maybe it's somebody who's passed on, or maybe it's somebody you don't never see anymore, but you know that there's some bitterness. I want you to really investigate your heart. Is there bitterness there? And start working through the process of forgiving them. Making that an actual thing that you do. Apply it to your life. And then thirdly, what I want to do is think about people that you may have offended. Think about that. Just go through your week and your times. Look at the people you know at work and maybe in your home or maybe your neighbors and say, what have I done? Just investigate it. What have I done that I could have really offended them or hurt them or made them feel bad in any way? And then start praying about whether or not you can actually go to them and apologize. To really say that you would like their forgiveness. Because what you can see in that is people will start to see you differently. It's like in that Acts passage where your heart changes and now your life shows it. And what a great witness for people who don't know Jesus, that you would go to them and ask for forgiveness. This is what I'd like you to do this week. This is what I think is really important. Forgiveness is a powerful, powerful thing. We can do a lot with it. We can do a lot with it. God has done tremendous things with it. We wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for